am Julie Zasada. I'm the Executive Director of the Cedar Lake Historical Association. I want to thank you for joining us today at the final presentation of our 2020-2021 History Roadshow, Citizens of Cedar Lake. Would it really be a History Roadshow if I was not talking about my t-shirt? So my astute followers are going to recognize that I have another trend on my t-shirt. No, it is not the Monon Railroad. This is one of the locomotives up at the Hesston Steam Museum. And the Hesston Steam Museum, of course, is in LaPorte, Indiana, and they are our partners in a special program this summer called Seeing Through History. For the lucky guests here on site, I have a special sneak peek for you of our marketing poster. So I want all cameras down. I want to see any paparazzi trying to snap exclusive pictures here. You can go ahead and ooh and ah. Isn't it lovely? Isn't it lovely? So this is a hand-painted image that we're going to be using to promote the steamboats this summer. So for those of you at home, you'll just have to come out and see it. So Steam Through History is a one-week collaborative event here at the Cedar Lake Historical Association with the Hesston Steam Museum. It's from July 26th through the 30th. They are going to bring their vintage 1915 steamboat to the lake, and tours aboard this 20-passenger vessel are going to focus on local history as well as the science behind steam power while providing a way to get our guests out on the water, because we all know that the town looks very different from the lake. Steam Through History is supported by an Indiana Humanities Collaboration Grant, Legacy Foundation Transform Lake County Grant, Indiana Historical Society Heritage Support Grant made possible by the Lilly Endowment, and Town of Cedar Lake Tourism Funds. It is the first collaboration and the most elaborate program that we have ever attended by far here at the museum. While the steamboat is a highlight, we're also excited to show the community how we are more fully presenting the relevance of Cedar Lake history with supplemental humanities programs and our new exhibits. In addition to the steamboat rides, programming during Steam Through History is going to include recreating the sites of Lassen's Dewey Line's signature voyage using augmented reality technology. Guests will be able to also experience other aspects of the reimagined exhibit rooms that we have. We'll have guest speakers, STEM workshops, and many other children's activities. Now, perhaps you already know that Cedar Lake became a recreational destination with the 1881 arrival of the Monon Railroad, which would regularly transport thousands of tourists to the community. Lassen's Resort was founded in 1896 with a single steamboat that ferried passengers from the Monon Depot to all points around the lake. And that's what you see there in those pictures, is the Monon Depot at the top right and one of the Dewey Line launches on the left. The Hesston Steam Museum boat is the Alabama No. 4. It is nearly identical to the Lassen's Dewey Line launches, and it was originally a lifeboat on the SS Alabama, which was a Great Lakes steamer, and that's actually the picture on the bottom right there is the Great Lakes steamship, the SS Alabama. That was put into service on June 29th of 1910, and she was licensed to carry 2,000 passengers with overnight accommodations for 300 persons and 2,500 tons of cargo. The Alabama No. 4 lifeboat was acquired and restored by James Kincaid of Elkhart, Indiana, and fitted with a single-cylinder steam engine, which develops 20 horsepower, and a vertical boiler, which supplies the steam for the engine. And she looks, like I said, nearly identical to one of the Dewey Line boats. We're really excited to have her out here this summer. Now, I need to quote our colleague Ted Rita, who is the general manager of the Hesston Steam Museum, because he cautions us, steam power isn't without its trials and tribulations. It's not like turning on your pontoon or your car. The boat is historic. She takes a bit more work than a modern piece of machinery. Now, both of us are working very diligently on this program, but we have to add a caveat. The steamboat is not 100% guaranteed just yet. We're working with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. They have to grant approval for operation of this vessel. Once approved, once we know that she's safe to operate, which we already do, but we need their blessing, once she's approved, she will be the only passenger for hire steamboat in service in the state of Indiana. If you go anywhere throughout this state and see a steamboat, we'll tell you right now it's fake, it's not authentic, it's imitation. So we will be the only steamboat for hire in the state. And there's also the hurdle of insurance, because the first company that we worked with said, oh, we can't cover that boat, it's too old. So we persevere, we move on, we're going to get this done. Now, I want you all to make sure that you save the dates, again, July 26th through the 30th of this summer. But even more so, I want to invite you to become involved with this program. I am going going to need at least 50 volunteers, if not more, to pull this week off. So whether you want to help in my hands-on history room, escorting guests from one program to another, reception desk readers, giving tours of the museum, safety officers, cafe attendants, runners on the grounds, the cleaning crew, or you can't be here, but you can buy food or cook it, we would love to have you donate food to help all these volunteers be fed throughout the course of this production. So we can talk after the presentation to figure out where you might be able to help. I would really appreciate having help on this program. Now, once again, welcome to the last series, or last program in the History Roadshow series. This has actually turned out to be our 6th. I had 5 planned, but I just did a bonus presentation earlier this month on our beloved Lassen's Resort, which this is the building that you're in, is the Lassen's Resort Hotel. So I did a whole presentation on Lassen's Resort for the ladies of Tri-Kappa, Dyer, Cherville, and St. John. Now that was actually the program that was supposed to take place last March in 2020, but got canceled due to lockdown. So we ran that earlier this month. Now everything is up on YouTube. This presentation will be uploaded on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch all of them again in the future at your leisure. So thank you for participating. For those of you who came every single time, I really appreciate you coming out and supporting us this winter. Before we get to Dr. King, though, Dr. Robert W. King, we have to look a little bit further at the family tree. And we're going to start with his grandfather and father. We have the benefit of knowing a little bit more about them from a family genealogy document. So I want to share this with you. We're going to begin by talking about Edward F. King. That was our Dr. Robert King's father. He's a physician and surgeon with offices in the Citizens Bank building at Anderson. He was a native of Indiana and was born while the home of the King family was located on Walnut Street in Indianapolis. Dr. King has made a very credible record in his professional career. He holds his father in very high regard as a splendid example of American citizenship, one who raised himself from poverty to affluence and influence. Up there on the screen, his father, Bernard King, that's the one in the gold circle there. Bernard King was born in County Down, Ireland. At an early age, he was left an orphan. When 14 years old, he came to the United States. He possessed the characteristics of Irish wit, great native intelligence, and remarkable industry, and the ability to fit himself into his surroundings. From New York, he went on to Cleveland and worked at different things in that city, also in Cincinnati. Later, he was employed in construction work on the main building for the Female Insane Asylum in Indianapolis. He also took the opportunity of attending a night school to supplement his meager educational opportunities. As a result of ill health, Bernard tried an outdoor occupation, starting out with a pack of merchandise on his back and walking over many country roads and in rural communities throughout the states of Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. He showed the qualities of a salesman, and when his profits justified it, he bought a horse which carried him and his pack, and he continued riding through the country. When his capital had been further supplemented, Bernard became a huckster, using a wagon and a horse and selling fruits and vegetables over Marion and adjoining counties of Indiana. The next stage in his business career came when he opened a grocery store at Walnut and Lock Streets in Indianapolis. He ran a business in such a manner as to attract trade even from as far away as the other side of the river, and later he became a dealer in state institutions. His surplus wealth was invested in real estate, and after disposing of his mercantile interests, he devoted all his time to the handling of his age. His wife came to America with an older sister, and they lived in Cleveland for a time and ultimately reared a family of 11 children. That's most of them there at a family reunion in that photograph from 1912. Dr. Edward F. King, father of our Robert, obtained his early education in the St. Bridget's Parochial School and in one of the public schools of Indianapolis, and was a pupil in the Shortridge Manual Training High School. In 1907, he began the study of medicine at Purdue University and later entered the medical department of Louisville University, where he was graduated. Dr. King practiced medicine at Bargersville in Johnson County until 1924, when he returned to Indianapolis, opened an office for private practice, and also did the work of local surgeon for the Illinois Central Railway in Marion, Morgan, and Johnson counties. From Indianapolis, he came to Anderson and has rapidly built himself into a profitable business and into high favor and esteem as a capable doctor. He has done postdoctoral work in children's diseases, in skin, internal medicine, and other subjects at the Indiana University School of Medicine. While acting as railroad surgeon, he joined the American Association of Railroad Surgeons. Dr. King married Nancy Davis Williams in 1912. She was born at Howesville, Hancock County, Kentucky, and was the daughter of William Williams and Antoinette Lamar. They have 6 children: Charles Edward, Marie Antoinette, Robert Rowe, Ruth Lamar, William Bernard, and John Paul. Dr. King, since coming to Anderson, has been physician to the local branch of the Fraternal Order of Eagles. He and his family are members of St. Mary's Catholic Church. So that was an excerpt from the history of Madison County, Indiana. Just give some background there. That family picture, like I said, was taken in 1912, and there you see Edward and Nancy circled in gold. This would have been taken basically the year that they got married, so no children featured in this picture with them. And I recognize that these pictures aren't the easiest to make out, but that's all that we have when you're talking about an older family genealogy document, and thankfully we can no longer rely on just Xeroxing and can scan photographs and things like that nowadays. So we don't know too much about Dr. King, or Robert King. We don't know too much about his early years. He was born on January 7th, 1917 in White River Township of Johnson County, Indiana. He graduated from St. Mary High School in Anderson. And then that picture at the left that you see there. So on the far left is Robert. Then John is sitting on Marie's lap. And then you have William sitting on Charles's lap. And this little girl here who is just barely in the shadows is Ruth. So that's him and his siblings. That was taken in 1928. And then, I'm not sure the date of the next picture. High school, perhaps college. Not much else, like I said, is known about Robert's early years. The 1940 census reveals that he was living at home in Anderson with his mother at the time. She was age 51. We're presuming that she was a widow because some of the family documentation mentions that his dad became ill starting in his 30s. Sister Ruth was also living at home. She was 21-year-old librarian at the time. And then their 12-year-old brother, John, was also living at home. And it appears that Robert had completed his third year of college by that point because the census listed him as employed in college, but as employed as an inspector in an auto parts factory. He graduated from Ball State University in Muncie, and then, following the long family tradition of medical practitioners that included his father and two uncles, Robert decided to go into the medical profession. He attended Loyola University Medical School in Chicago, and most who were in uniform in his graduating class, including Dr. King, were in the Navy. While he was doing his residency at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, he was introduced to Mary Alice Knoll. She was a naval nurse up at Great Lakes, and Mary Alice's sister was a nurse also, and it actually happened to introduce them. Robert and Mary Alice were married on October 14th, 1944, and upon marrying, Mary Alice had to quit the Navy because both spouses couldn't be in active service at that same time. They eventually had 7 children, approximately 20 years apart: Cecilia, Sarah, Patricia, Robert Jr., Thomas, Edward, and Elizabeth. These two pictures on this next slide are taken in 1945, so that's Robert with his mother in Chicago, and the next picture says October of 1945 in Alameda, California, and you can see in the back there's one of the naval ships in the background. And he's in uniform there, of course. Dr. King served until 1947. The Kings made their first home in Hammond, where their first 2 daughters were born. Dr. King would treat patients in Hammond, and then he would share how he asked them, "Where are you coming from?" They're explaining they're driving all the way up from Cedar Lake, and he was very intrigued by that. "Don't you have a doctor back at home? Why are you coming all the way up here?" So he had traveled down to Cedar Lake, got to learn more about the community, and the story goes that he purchased their first home in Cedar Lake in 1949 without even showing Mary Alice. This picture, I don't know the dates of the pictures on the left. He's still in uniform, so this could have been one of their children who was born before 1947. And in the picture on the right appears to be that Cecilia, Sarah, and Patricia, and maybe Cecilia, the occasion of her first communion, I'm not sure. But that is the early times with the family there, the King family. Dr. King served again in the 1st Marine Corps in the Korean conflict from 1954 to 1956. He was instrumental in the MASH unit. Patsy recalls hearing a tape recording of a phone call where her father called from Tokyo and asked her mom to move to California. And they did. For a brief time in 1955, the family lived in Oceanside, California. And of that same recording of the phone call that Patsy had listened to, she shared that her dad had asked about her 2 siblings and her younger brother, who was about 6 months old at the time, but not about her. Upon his discharge, Dr. King held the rank of commander. So again, that would have been in 1956 when he was discharged. And here's another photograph that we're also assuming is about 1956 because we see Rose sitting on Mom's lap there, and he looks to be, again, about a year old or so. I do not know which girl is which in the picture. I'm guessing Cecilia on the far left, then Sarah, Patsy in the middle between mom and dad, and then Ro on mom's lap. During his career, Dr. King was in general practice and also a surgeon. He did it all. Though his children say if he wasn't a doctor, he probably would have been an engineer. And this is a couple of examples of why they say that. Number one, he would go out of his way to research what was ailing his patients. The kids saw him poring over books and journals night after night, just trying to really uncover what was going on and how could he help these ailing patients. He also had developed a chalky medicine with one of the pharmacists to help with severe cases of diarrhea and bacterial infections. And the pharmacist says, you cannot give this to people, it tastes terrible, they're going to throw up. So they came up with the idea of adding cocoa to the recipe. So they made chocolate medicine. And then the other thing, he would go into homes, he would ask for a bucket of water, and then he would throw it all over the rugs. And that was his way of adding humidity to the home's environment, including in the family home, because Patsy shared a story about how her dad was humidifying the home in one manner or another, and her sheet music had gotten wet from whatever degree of humidity he was creating, her piano sheet music. Lots of stories from the family about how their dad used to make house calls. The kids would sit in the car, they would go on these ride-alongs, sit in the car, listen to the radio while he went into the homes to meet with the patients. And they think those ride-alongs were probably to help Mary Alice a little bit, getting some of the kids out of the house for a little while. When he would make these trips, in particular to the hospital in Dyer, there was a patient who lived along Sheffield Avenue, and she would leave a little sign in the window, and that's how he knew he should stop and go and visit her. So he would go out of his way and create whatever mechanisms he needed to have in place to know how best to serve his patients. His children explained he took care of the person first, and worried later about how they were going to pay, much to the chagrin of his office staff, who would get frustrated because he'd write no charge on a bill, and then they'd see people driving off in brand new cars, and they didn't like that too much. But he had a heart of gold. Payment would sometimes come in the form of a box of wax beans, or someone would do work around the family yard. But Mary Alice put her foot down when someone showed up with live chickens one time. That was a little bit more than she could handle as payment. And it was not uncommon for the Sunday dinner to be interrupted by someone bleeding at the back door. Dr. King would take them over to the office, and it would be one of the kids' jobs to then spray down the sidewalk outside the house and get the blood off of the sidewalk. There was even a really peculiar instance where a man died of a heart attack right outside the home. So he had come over to find Dr. King. Dr. King knew that there was some sort of trauma and went over to the man's home. He gets to the man's house and finds the wife had already passed away. In the meantime, the husband has now just passed away on the sidewalk outside their house. And so they had to help figure out who died first, because there was this inheritance issue that they helped settle for the family. So that's one of the more unique situations that they had to deal with. But again, no effort was spared for Dr. King, always being there for his patients. The King children earned their keep by doing their chores in the yard. They were up and outside working by 7 a.m. until about noon, and then they could go swimming and have their summer fun at the lake. And Dr. King would leave a list. His kids shared, even though he wasn't around much between his office hours, his evening hours, being called up to the hospital, missing out on family events, he still found time to make a list. There was always a list, his son said. There were benches to be painted, the beachfront to be cleaned, leveling piles of dirt. Originally, the family homestead had a lot of trees to where you couldn't really see the lake. This is the lakeside view of the house in this photograph. And so one of the chores was cutting down lots of those trees. And then Dr. King would dynamite the stumps. The cops would show up and they'd say, Doc, they're complaining on the other side of the lake. You gotta stop blasting now. And then all those ruts had to be filled in with truckloads of dirt and then smoothed back out. So that's where the family chores came from. And it turns out even after he had passed away, the family still found some dynamite in the house that had to call in the SWAT team and whatnot to take that out. So Dr. King also had a contact who had told him about this old pile of bricks. I don't know if this was in payment for service or how this came about, but whatever he wanted, Dr. King was told, go ahead, go over to this yard and you can pick up these bricks. And so he and the kids did, lugged them back to the house, and ended up installing a brick path on the property. So always making use of anything that he could get his hands on. Now, long before Dr. King was at Cedar Lake, the community was a popular resort from the 1880s through the 1930s. Early developers had restrictions for the Chicagoans who had summer homes here. Most importantly, no indoor plumbing was allowed, only chemical toilets. But By the time that the Great Depression hit, Chicagoans had sold their city homes and made permanent homes at Cedar Lake. Developers waived the no indoor plumbing restriction, and homeowners began digging their own septic systems, being only as big as a 55-gallon steel drum. And the problem was that there was no way that these systems could hold all the waste, and eventually they rusted out, resulting in sewage oozing into the yards. According to Florence Wahlberg, Mary Alice said, "Don't come into this house until you take those shoes off," because during his house calls, he got soaked with all sorts of muck. One day, he had made a house call, and this particular house had a pathway made of 2x4s so that you could walk up to the front door. And as he was walking up, he kind of slipped off this makeshift walkway, and his foot sunk into a pile of muck. And it came up over his shoes. That was what prompted him to begin researching how on earth can we get a sewer system in this community? How can we go after federal funds? And that's where the researching into incorporation really began. Now I want to share a letter that really illustrates Dr. King's passion for this lake community, the health of the water, and his community-minded spirit. I'm not sure when exactly this was written. It could have been after the incorporation efforts or before, but we have a letter here that's on his letterhead. It's called Fact, Not Fancy. The fact that we live at Cedar Lake must at some time or other have caused us to wonder why we tolerate the inconveniences of living here. The fancy of living near a lake is generally the basic reason. We fancy ourselves enjoying the pleasures of the lake constantly, yet most of us spend less time enjoying it than do many who live miles away. However, we must enjoy it or we wouldn't stay here. We of Cedar Lake must accept a definite fact. Cedar Lake itself, the lake proper, is changing. We've heard stories of deep holes in various parts of the lake with depths of 30 to 60 feet. There's no reason to doubt that this was once true. However, this is no longer true. 5 years ago, careful soundings were taken by the Cedar Lake Boat Patrol, and the deepest hole found in the lake was 14.5 feet. When we consider that each heavy rain carries literally tons of soil into the lake, and that the dam prevents its escape, we can realize that the lake is loosening the deep holes, that it is being saucerized from the bottom up. In 1948, the water at the end of our pier was at least a foot deeper than it is now. Now I can walk around the pier with the water at shoulder height where it was formerly over my head. The surface water level remains relatively constant, varying naturally with the amount of rainfall. The filling in process will accelerate as the lake becomes progressively more shallow. The loss of depth of the lake decreases the total volume of water in the lake, thereby posing changes of the water and its contents. The type and number of fish change with a downward trend toward the least desirable types of fish, with the scavenger type of fish becoming predominant. With the decrease in volume, the temperature of the water rises much sooner in the summer to where the growth of algae is favorable. Each of the last few years has shown progressive increase in the green and blue algae growth, despite attempts last year and this to control the growth. The support given to the hard work done by the Cedar Lake Development Association is a disgrace to Cedar Lake generally. They've worked to control the algae growth and have had to literally beg for donations. Volunteers to operate the equipment for spraying the lake have been very scarce. Since the businesses directly on the lake, which derive their income from the lake, have the most at stake in maintaining the condition of the lake, it seems to me to be a good plan to mark off the lake in sections, with the responsibility of spraying their section directly up to them. Here's the second part of the letter here. Volunteers should sign up at one of these places, and you see he drew the little map of the lake and put some sites on there. There are many things which should be done here at the lake. We hear what they should do all the time. Everyone at Cedar Lake is one of the they. To get the ball rolling on some of these things, let's all pitch in to clear the algae from the lake. Donate what you can. The members of the association have already given $120 each. And above all, volunteer to help for an hour or so on the actual spraying of the lake. For once, let's get some civic pride aroused and get something done. Signed, R.W. King, M.D. I'm just proud I was able to read this. Usually a doctor's handwriting is not legible, so able to share this with you. So because of all of the pollution that was going on in the community, Dr. King really took the reins, began researching the incorporation efforts, like I mentioned. He had said that Cedar Lake could apply for federal funds for a sewer if it was incorporated, and county officials supported the action because of all the sewage laying all around. The waste of homeowner septic systems did not directly flow into the lake, but because filtration systems were not adequate, bacteriological problems frequently occurred. In addition, with Cedar Lake Incorporated, funds for other services like streets, garbage, and police would be readily available. Now, you'll remember from my presentation on Geraldine Quartercracks, and she had this little book that she had written, our hometown, Cedar Lake. This was published in 1972. This was because she kept fielding all of those information inquiries in the early part of her time as clerk treasurer. And so she made this book to really share and answer the most common questions that were being asked. Well, there's also a part on Cedar Lake history. And since Dr. King is really the founding father of our community and its incorporation efforts, I want to read that history that Geraldine had typed up in this little book. So again, this was written as of 1972. The history of Cedar Lake began officially in 1834 when a government land survey was made and the lake was named Clear Lake. The lake is kidney-shaped with its greatest length being about 2 1/8 miles and its greatest breadth a little more than 3/4 of a mile. The 805-acre lake is the result of the melting of the glacier and the collecting of this water in the clay-lined depression. Today, its maximum depth is about 15 feet, with an average depth of 6 to 8 feet. When the land survey was made in 1896, the map indicated there were 22 cottages, 2 hotels, 4 ice houses around the lake. In 1881, as I had mentioned, the Mona Railroad had entered the area, so by 1900, they were transporting thousands of visitors from Chicago and other cities in the summer. At this time, diversion aspects of the area were greatly overcome, and land began to develop rapidly, so that by 1948, there were approximately 6,100 year-round residents, 300 seasonal dwellings, 1 boat storage and repair shop, 17 grocery stores, 20 taverns, 2 lumber yards, 2 hardware stores, 3 garages, 1 machine shop, and an airport. In addition, there were 2 year-round hotels, 3 summer hotels, 4 churches, 2 schools, and approximately 25,000 tourists migrating into this area annually. Real estate developers subdivided land into parcels as small as 25-foot widths. This growth resulted in the creation of many problems for the area. The lake became polluted and there was a decline in the use of the lake for legitimate recreational and water purposes. As a result of this decline, the Chicago Tribune has estimated a $2 to $3 million annual income loss to the area. Along about 1948 to 1950, attempts were made to get the people of the area to incorporate. None of these attempts were successful. In January 1961, a stock company was formed in an effort to provide sanitary sewers for the Cedar Lake community. A consulting engineer was hired and a preliminary engineering report was prepared for the project. Although this project was found to be satisfactory by the Indiana Stream Pollution Control Board, it failed to materialize. It then became evident that there was a need for financial assistance from the federal level. If Cedar Lake was ever to construct a sewage treatment system, in order to obtain that assistance, it was essential to have a legal entity such as a town or a city in place. In view of this, Dr. Robert W. King, a local physician who was dedicated to the improvement of the lot of the people of his community, undertook the responsibility of organizing a group of citizens to assist him in bringing about the incorporation of the area. All this was done at a considerable personal expense to Dr. King. However, incorporation did not happen without opposition. There was a concerted effort to oppose the incorporation move, and this effort was successful for several years. Finally, in 1965, the lower courts declared the town legally incorporated. Although the ruling was under appeal to the Indiana Supreme Court, the town was permitted to elect officials, provide services, and levy a tax rate for more than 2 years. It was during this period that the town board took immediate steps to plan for the sewers and a sewage treatment plant. Federal assistance in excess of $1.5 million was given to the town to begin construction of these facilities. A bond commitment was acquired at about a 4% interest rate on June 13, 1967. Ironically, it was also on that day that by a decision of the Indiana Supreme Court, the town was declared to be non-existent. And according to the court, it had never existed. The reason? The court ruled because the law concerning incorporation had not been fulfilled. In that unintentionally, some residents and property owners did not receive proper notification. This was a great blow to the people of Cedar Lake and to the planned construction of the sewage system. The hopes of the people to restore economic health to the community were shattered. The town board decided to begin incorporation proceedings all over again rather than appeal the Supreme Court decision. Calls came in from many citizens who wanted to help. Many hours were spent by these volunteers in preparation of mailing lists and the addressing of letters to notify everyone of the hearing to be held regarding the incorporation of the town. And again, if you saw the Geraldine Corder-Crack's presentation, she was one of those people addressing all those letters. Dr. King had a giant poster in his basement with a map of the lake listing the residences of all the citizens of the community. The hearing was held, and on October 30th, 1967, the Lake County Commissioners passed an ordinance creating the town of Cedar Lake. On December 19th of 1967, an election was held in the town to select 7 trustees and a clerk treasurer. Opposition to this incorporation still existed, and the legality of the town was under question for almost 2 more years. On September 29, 1969, the Indiana Supreme Court upheld the incorporation of the town. Cedar Lake's incorporation presented a most unique situation in legal annals. Its incorporation has proved to be the most costly, again this was written in 1972, the most costly of any town in the state of Indiana and perhaps the nation. So to give some more background on what other opposition was transpiring. So other than receiving federal and state grants for a sewer and other services for Cedar Lake, Dr. King saw the importance of taxes, but because of that issue, many people opposed him. So for example, in the area of Cook, which is over by Holy Name Church, on the other side of town over by Route 41, they were opposed because they were part of the West Creek watershed area and they paid taxes for the cleanup of West Creek. They didn't want to have to pay additional taxes for the cleaning of the lake. To make matters worse, there was a group referred to as the Terrible 10, backed by attorney Straley Thorpe, who were fighting vigilantly against the incorporation. Dr. King had tried to explain that taxes for sewers would not be too high because the cost would be spread over 30 or 40 years through long-term sewage revenue bonds. But because of the opposition, Cedar Lake lost a $974,000 HUD grant. And then Attorney Thorpe claimed that Dr. King did not properly inform the citizens of incorporation. Dr. King explained, that he had used the list provided by the county assessor, the treasurer, and the post office. He wasn't required to do any more than that, but through this loophole, some people weren't notified, and that's what the attorney had used to fight the battle. Nonetheless, the majority of Cedar Lake citizens did favor incorporation, and by September 29, 1969, the Supreme Court of Indiana declared that retroactively, back on October 30th of 1967, Cedar Lake was officially incorporated as a town under the rule of the Lake County Commissioners. All of the tremendous work by Dr. Robert W. King and his supporters finally paid off, and by the early 1970s, the sewer system began to be laid. So I have no context for this picture that I'm sharing, but it's a really funny picture and I just wanted to share it. Love the outfit. So that's 1973. That is Dr. King on the far left with his son Edward in the middle and Roe on the right. But the ad, I do have context for that. So that ad is from the Cedar Lake Journal, October 31st of 1979. In 1979, Dr. King ran as an independent and was elected to a 4-year term on the Cedar Lake Town Council, representing Ward 6. So listen to this. He won with a total of 508 votes to 502 votes for Henry LeMay, who was his Republican challenger, and Wilbur Cox, 483 votes, who was his Democratic challenger. So it matters. Every single vote matters here in Cedar Lake. I even have notes from Geraldine Corder-Crack's presentation that said that she lost one of her re-election bids by 4 votes. So votes really do matter in this community, and I guess in this 1979 race, only 50% of the voters had turned out. So just a little public service announcement that when it comes to local matters, please get out there and vote because your vote matters. So after this term that began in 79, Dr. King, or 1980, Dr. King did not seek re-election, but during, whoops, I didn't mean to show that first, but we'll move on. During the 1984 Cedar Lake Summerfest, Dr. King was awarded the Citizen of the Year Award for his work in the incorporation and development of Cedar Lake. So I want to read this little proclamation. This is again from the Cedar Lake Summerfest on the occasion of his award, and this is 1984. It says, "From this day forward, the town of Cedar Lake has a birthday to celebrate. On October 30th, 1967, the legal documents were signed by the Lake County Commissioners, and the next light of day became Alpha Day. November 1st, 1967, the first legal day of existence as a town. Of course, it took the state Supreme Court nearly 2 years to make sure it was all legally recorded. Alpha Day did not come about without struggle and strain and discouragement and disappointment. To those founders must come our never-ending respect and deepest appreciation. Their struggles and triumphs must become the first chapter of our history as an incorporated town. We will not allow forgetting their names and what they did to ensure the progress of our community. It is time we cleared the confusion and clarified the date for future historians. In the 60s, 20 years ago, the efforts of many people were combined against many odds to alleviate the problem of pollution of the lake. Some of them were Al Schott, Ambrose Rasher, Mr. O'Rourke, the Westerhoffs, Ralph Klaus, Joe Schutz, Cecil Hayes, Robert Hawkinson, and Gus Wahlberg, as well as the Cedar Lake Property Owners Association, and all those who were elected to serve and are remembered today by a simple certificate. The work of future Summerfest committees is made easier by the long list of honorees. Each year, another phase of our history should be revealed. We are so lucky to have methodical people who know how to file and arrange information, namely Beatrice Horner-Keshner Giovanni and Charles Cowder. All future programs will be based on their records. With young people growing up in our community, leaving us for a while to learn about the whole world in outer space, we wish some of them at least want to bring new knowledge and expertise back to their hometown. We have a bright and hopeful future because we are a young, vibrant, and new town in the county of Lake, the state of Indiana. Of all those many names mentioned during the earliest struggles toward incorporation, the one outstanding is that of a professional person who guided and encouraged and set an example of fortitude in a period of discouragement and pain. Through his knowledge, patience, and relentless determination, our town was born. In humble appreciation for his work, on behalf of the townspeople and the Cedar Lake Park Board, I present this plaque to Dr. Robert Rowe King. So we're very happy to know that Dr. King was honored during his lifetime for his efforts, and he really felt the appreciation that we all share for him today to get our community started. This picture here, though, was taken in 1984. This is on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Robert and Mary Alice. And it's actually very fortuitous that they chose to celebrate their 40th anniversary because just 2 short years later, on Wednesday, October 14th, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. Dr. King was age 69. He had received a first Social Security check 2 days later, that Friday, and then he saw his last patient. Sadly and unexpectedly, he died very suddenly after complications from his lingering emphysema and COPD and other illnesses. The date was October 18th, 1986, the feast of St. Luke the Evangelist, who is the patron saint of physicians. Dr. Robert Rowe King, as his family says, was a very humble, modest, generous, mild-mannered, pious man. So many people showed up to his funeral that they had to close access. And I want to close this presentation today by reading a eulogy that his daughter had prepared for the funeral. We, the children of Dr. Robert Rowe King, are not alone in our grief, simply because he helped so many people. The hundreds of people who came in the last 3 days to extend their sympathy to us helped us to see our father again and appreciate him in new ways. You helped us renew our memories of the life we had with him. We are proud of him and the model he set for us. Some of you were familiar names. We took your urgent phone messages. We waited in the car while he was making a house call in your home. Some of you were familiar faces from our neighborhood, our spiritual community, our civic community, and our schools. You all helped us see our Father through your eyes. Your stories let us smile through our tears. You lightened the burden of our sorrow as you polished our memories. We heard you say that he came out in the middle of the night, that he made sure he was there when the baby was born, that he was so good with your dying parents, that he was never too busy to come, that he went out of his way, that he knew what you were going through, that he always had time to talk, that he was a good Christian, and that he was a good friend. What we heard from you in so many different ways was that he was a good man. We are glad that you came to pay your last respects and share your thoughts with us. When you told us that we were good-looking children and we looked like our parents, he told us to say thank you, and we do. We say thank you to each one of you. We all know that Dr. Robert King was motivated in all that he did by a love for life. So I want to thank you all for coming out today. for participating in this final presentation of the History Roadshow for this season. As I said, we weren't sure this was all going to be able to happen this year, but we're really happy to have been able to share all these stories with you. And now I invite you back on May 7th of 2021. We are going to be celebrating the grand reopening here of our museum, and we would love to have you come out, see our new exhibits, and learn about some other very special things that we have in store for you. So thank you for coming out. I hope you have enjoyed these presentations and look forward to seeing you this summer.